In this video, we'll see how to create a stored procedure, and we'll use the classic Hello World example to display some text to the console screen. Before we do that, I'm going to introduce the idea of working with a block of statements to execute as a unit. And for that, I'll want a little background. So let's begin by creating a table. We'll have a counselor table with a counselor ID, first name, last name, and phone number. We'll create that table and add some records into it. Well, we've got one record so far, and let's take a look at that record. Okay, so now I've got the background set up to be able to execute multiple statements as a single unit. To do that, we're going to need the begin end block. And so for that, we will start with the keyword begin. And then we will put whatever statements we want to execute as a unit. So in this case, I'm going to just put another insert statement to insert a record. So you'll notice that even though this statement is almost identical to the one that I executed before, when I put the prior one in, as soon as I hit enter, it executed the record. But because now I'm in the middle of a begin statement, when I hit enter, it does not execute that record. It's just queuing that statement up, getting it ready. I'll go ahead and add another statement in here, and I can have as many as I want, and then I'll put the end keyword to end the begin end block, a semicolon, and then to run it, I will just use the / and hit enter. And so now that has executed those two records. And so if we bring back all the records from the counselor table, we will see that we've got those three records entered in. So that's the idea of making statements run together as a unit. Put them in a begin end block. All right, so now let's take a look at writing some text out to the console. Again, we'll use a begin end block. So we'll say begin. And now we'll use the DBMS output statement. We will then, or the DBMS output object. Then we will use the putLine method of that object. So we are saying we are going to call this putLine method, which will display information out to the screen. We will then give it what we want to display, in this case, hello world, and a semicolon. Now we'll end our block and execute it. Now, this is a little bit puzzling because Oracle tells us that the procedure completed successfully, but it hasn't displayed that anywhere. And the reason is that SQL Plus out of the box does not display the results of the DBMS output putLine statement. And so to do that, we've got to tell it to set the server output on. And so it's a directive we have to use to configure SQL Plus. So we'll say set server output on, and that's really all it takes. But because I typically like to use leading spaces to format and organize text on the screen, I'm going to add one more clause. The format wrapped. By default, anything I display to the console screen will have any leading space trimmed from it, unless I say format wrapped. And so that's my preferred way to work with the server output on directive. So now that we've turned the server output on, I'll go ahead and create that block again that displays hello world and execute it. And this time we can see that it did print hello world out to the screen. All right, I'd like to add a little more complexity to this before we make it into a stored procedure, and that is I'd like to create a variable. And so adding a variable, we begin, instead of with begin, we'll start with a declare block. So we'll say declare, then we'll create a variable name, which can be any name as long as it's a valid Oracle identifier. Got to start with a letter and so forth. I usually like to put my variable name starting with v underscore, just so as I'm looking at them in a block of PL SQL code, I can tell that it's a variable that I've declared. And then I'll give it a data type, just as if I'm creating a column in a table. And that declares my variable. Now I can go ahead and have my begin end block, so I'll start with begin. Now I'm going to assign a value to that variable, so I just put the name of the variable, and then I'll say colon equals, that'll be the assignment statement in PL SQL, and I'll just put a string literal here. So instead of hello world, we'll say hello earth, and a semicolon, and that's the assignment statement. Now I'll go ahead and move on to the DBMS output line, but instead of having hello world as a string literal in this, I'll now put the name of the variable inside those parentheses. And now I'll end my begin-end block, and I should be able to execute that and see that we've got hello earth printing as what was in my variable. So that's pretty good. So at this point now, I think I'm ready to create that block as a procedure. So to do that, I will start with the keyword create, and I'll say what I'm creating, create a procedure, and then I'll give that procedure a name, hello world. You'll notice the name comes here without quotes. That works great as long as the procedure by that name doesn't already exist, but if it does, this will cause an error. We would have to drop the procedure first unless we use the or replace clause. So we'll say create or replace procedure hello world. Now we use the keyword as. And now we're ready to put our declaration section. Now, before we were putting this as a part of a procedure, we would use the keyword declare. But because this is now being built as a procedure, there's no reason to say declare because that's the only next thing that I could put here. And so I'll go ahead and bring in my variable and then the rest of my begin-end block that I had before. And I'm ready to execute it. And so it tells me the procedure was created. You'll notice it hasn't executed the procedure, so all this statement has done is created that procedure. To execute the procedure, I use the exec statement, followed by the name of the procedure. And now, because this is not a part of a begin-end block, as soon as I hit enter on this line, it should execute that procedure. And in fact, we see that it has printed that hello earth. All right, so that's how we create a stored procedure. We could now execute that anytime we want. Log out of Oracle, log back in, and that procedure will still be there for me to execute now just by saying exec hello world. If you want to be able to get a list of all your stored procedures, it's just a matter of querying the metadata in the database. So let's take a look. I'll say select, and then I will say object name from the list of all the objects in the database. Now, I really don't want to see them all. I only want to see the ones where I'm the owner. So I will say where owner is equal to my username. And I don't want to see all the kinds of objects. I only want to see the objects where they're stored procedures. So object type equals stored procedure. And then when I execute that query, it should put a list of all of my stored procedures. And here's my hello world stored procedure. So that's it, creating a simple stored procedure.